All right, so here we are, back again. Hello, this is Kirby1, and welcome back to my channel. It's been a little while, but I felt like now is an optimal time to do a nation overview video. I've seen a couple of other people do YouTube videos of the nation of Ubar, but in my own personal experience, theory crafting is fun and can get you only so far. Actually playing the nation and learning to work with its strengths and its flaws, getting kicked in the ass while doing so, is the best teacher. And I have just finished probably one of the first games that showcased Ubar as a nation. It was hosted, the host created the game on the day that the Ubar patch dropped a couple of months ago, and that game has just finished. It was quite a long game. And so, and in addition to that, I'm playing a second game as Ubar as well. That one's getting a little tense right now, but we'll see how that goes. In any event, now that I've gotten a bunch of Ubar under my belt and had a lot of time theory crafting with other players as well, either interested in playing or who are currently playing both as Ubar and against Ubar, I want to share a little bit of my thoughts regarding the nation and in a general overview. Now, I am just going to breeze through a basic nation summary as quick as I can. We don't need to go into detail about each of these units. I think I'm hoping that this video is sort of geared toward people who already have an understanding of the basic game, who know what a slave trooper is versus like a camel and stuff like that. And so we'll just sort of do that, and then in addition, after that, I'm going to briefly go over the summons, the heroes as well, a couple of basic strategies. I'm going to pop over to pretender design then, and I'll give a breakdown of a couple of thoughts on what I would do in picking a pretender for Ubar, and then I'll round it all out with a basic example of expansion, of test expansion, not in-game expansion, and then a summary of how I did in one of my games and sort of like the end game kind of showcasing of what a game of Ubar might look like in real life in multiplayer. So for your unit lineup, you've got a couple of foreign recruits. You've got the Desert Warrior and the Camel Rider. Notably, Ubar has high fire paths, and both of these foreign recruits are archers. The Camel Rider is very good at stealth raiding backlines, especially led by a sheik who is a tax collector and can get money from anywhere he lands on. And the Desert Warriors are very, very cheap short bows, and their undisciplined is negated by Skirmisher, so they don't actually lose morale when fighting as undisciplined. However, they're not slaves, so they're not particularly useful to be led by this Ubaran commander or the rest of your guys, other than, say, a sheik, even though they're slower than the camel riders. So, questionable utility for the Ubaran Desert Warriors. Then you've got three different types of slave troops: spear and javelin variety, archer variety, and sort of heavy infantry variety with bodyguard. The archers are 10 gold short bows, so that's all right, and their upkeep is rather not there. Their upkeep is rather cheap, so you can mass these guys out. The theory behind the slave troops is sort of the same theory you would approach to Mikone's slave troops, or like another nation that just can pump out slaves. You can do it. It's a good way of boosting your early game power, but they're slaves, they're humans, they're not going to do very well against like an Awake Expander or hell-bless sacreds or anything of the sort. So keep that in mind. In addition, you can get ghouls in all of your wastes and your capital, whether or not it is a waste, which is pretty useful. Ghouls, I would suggest, are probably a good late game transition for you, because by that time you have magic to boost their protection, which is generally abysmal. Their 50% regeneration will do very, very, very well with a lot of extra protection, like Iron Warriors, Legions of not Legions of Steel, Army of Gold, Army of Lead, etc. And especially once they get hit into their second form with Ethereal as well. Unfortunately, they only have one attack instead of two, so that's kind of meh. But they can be beefy frontline meat shields for whatever else you might have late game, for example, Storm Demons or just Evocation spammers or stuff like that. Now, personally, I've come to decide that the Djinn Warrior is your best way to expand. In my first game, I tried a combination of Djinn Warriors and Camel Riders. Camel Riders are a little bit expensive gold-wise and would wind up cutting into how many Djinn Warriors I could recruit. So in a couple of future test games, I wound up just going straight Djinn Warrior, and that has worked out very well, as I will demonstrate in the expansion video. The reason why will also that I think these guys are the best expanders, even though they have ridiculously high costs, is I will get into in the Pretender design. Now, everything on this screen is what you get for either your first year or your first 3 years, depending on if you take your Pretender awake or imprisoned. There's a lot of good reasons to take them, not awake, dormant or imprisoned. There's a lot of good reasons to take your Pretender dormant. Again, I'll go over that in the Pretender design. And so this is what you get for just sort of defending against rushes. It can be done. You can get a lot of these guys and fighting in your scales. They're very potent and can deal with a pretty large number of enemy sacreds. Whether or not they can deal with an awake expander that's rushing your cap, I haven't really had the chance to try that out. So I guess this may be a dated video if, awake expander rushing Ubar's cap becomes a sort of meme that people wind up doing. But for your capital, your fort recruitments, you've got 2 cap-onlys commanders, and the rest can be recruited in any fort. The Ubaran Sheikhs can be recruited in any province outside of your fort as well. Interestingly enough, the Ubaran Scout cannot be recruited in any province. I believe Naba can recruit in the Middle Ages Ubaran Scouts anywhere. That would be really nice if you could, because these are 20 gold scouts. Otherwise, in the early age, if you wind up not finding an indie scout province, this is basically like your go-to backup anywhere recruitment scout. I would probably try to avoid recruiting Ubaran scouts if at all possible, unless you had a palisade that was being turned into a fortress that was not making mages for a couple turns, and you could make some extra scouts if you needed for cheap. Ubaran Commander, you start with one in your expansion army as well as some slaves. I highly recommend never making these guys again. They're pretty garbage, not 80 leadership, inspirational -1, taskmaster +2, which means they're literally good at only leading slaves. But even then, Tubas are just better at leading slaves in every way. They don't have negative inspiration. They have leadership 80 plus, and they have taskmaster +2, just like these guys do. You're going to be having a lot of Tubas lying around anyways. Have them lead your slaves or whatever else you wind up recruiting. These guys will not cut it for you. Get indie commanders in random provinces instead. Kahans are great research monkeys, but I would probably only wind up recruiting them if you don't have enough gold to get either a Tuba or a human Sahir. Because by the end of the game, they're not going to be really as effective at pumping out battlefield evocations as the other two. You can make do, like if you have Storm up, you can do Storm Power. You can swap an Air Gem on these guys, or a Fire Gem on these guys, and get up to Phoenix Power, or an Earth Gem and get up to Earth Power. And then they're not completely useless, but then it's pretty much a waste of gems to be doing that when you wouldn't have to do that for your other better mages. Human Sahirs, personally, I use these guys for expansion. The reason why is a couple fold. First off, they're cheaper than the Tubas. Second of all, they start with an air path, which means that they can do air shield from turn one all the time, whereas these guys have an air random and will not necessarily be able to get an air path. And lastly, they have more magic leadership. It says 10, but it's actually 15 because they're going to get +1 magic path. And these guys only have 5. Now, if you take like a magic leadership bless, then maybe that is kind of not the same case anymore. But the other two benefits still outweigh using these guys, using Tubas for expansion, because your gold will be preferably going into more Jinn warriors. Now, once you have enough gold to be recruiting and resources to be recruiting Jinn warriors and then Jinn Emirs, I would definitely switch out of your cap to recruiting as many Jinn Emirs as you can until your pretender wakes up. Maybe 1 or 2 Jinn Sahirs. I think they are slightly less expensive, but they're definitely less on the resources. So if you don't have enough resources to get Jinn Emirs and max Jinn Warrior recruitment, then maybe pick up a Jinn Sahir instead. They're still pretty good mages to have around. As far as the difference between the Jinn Emir and the Jinn Sahir, oh, sorry, I'm going to backtrack one more. So the Tubas, lastly, are your best research mages. And why do I say your best research mages? Is because you can get the highest amount of research per fort turn out of these guys than out of anybody else. Like if you have the gold, always buy a Tuba over a Kahin. If you don't have the gold, keep recruiting Kahins in order to keep the research ramp up. But look at the difference. You're getting 7 from a Kahin for 70 gold, and you're getting 13 from 195 gold. You're just going to straight up be researching faster by recruiting these every turn than these every turn. So again, if you have the gold, always get these guys. They're not quite as good battle mages because of the low paths that you'll be getting on these guys. You can actually get some pretty decent paths. Air 2, Fire 2, and then the Air-Earth cross path is something you can get with them, whereas you can't get Air-Earth cross path with Tubas for forging and some battlefield spells as well. So keep that in mind. It's good to mix and match, but for research purposes, just go straight Tubas, and then you're already in magic scale, so this is actually going to be 18 or 16 plus all of the owl quills and lightless lanterns that you can easily forge with these guys. Plus, in theory, you also have an option to take inspirational research pretenders if you wanted to go like hardcore tech route. So Tubas just straight up all the way. Again, as long as you have the gold. And I would be recruiting these as often as you can in every fort outside of your capital, and then never in your capital once you've finished expansion. As far as the other 2 cap-only commanders go, before your pretender wakes up, you'll want to recruit a couple of these guys just for diversity and some extra defensive power in case you are rushed. But for the most part, you probably won't be getting many of these guys again after your capital has sort of been upgraded when your pretender wakes up. They're still pretty good. This guy is actually a very decent battle mage. They'll always be able to cloud trapeze. They've pretty much got the same paths as the Shaitans, and They have Obfuscate, which is a fun little gimmick that you can play around with. It works the same way that Magic Mirror, I think the Elven Mirror works to conceal your units on the battle map. I'll give an example of this real quick right now. So right here we've got an Emir leading a couple of Gulas. Now we've got a Satis player over here. If we switch over to the Satis player, we can see those Gulas, and the reason is because I have this guy on defend. I actually had him attack here. Now you're not going to see the Emir himself because he has glamour, but the Gulas only have stealthy, so if you're going to make an attack move, you're going to see them on the strategic map wherever they land, or for example, wherever they're recruited from. If he were sneaking or hiding, you would not be able to see them. So we're going to move him back, and then we're going to do the same with a Sahir who has Obfuscate 10, which means that he can lead 10, up to 10 units that do not have glamour, for example. Like if these guys were with him as well, they have glamour, so they won't be seen. But he can lead up to 10 guys that don't have glamour, do the exact same thing, attack move, which means that in theory they should be seen. Host that game real quick, and then they are not, but they are there. They are there, and they did attack move, so you'd be able to see them if he were not obfuscating those units. And this is especially useful for things like moving around a couple of great eagles, for example. If you're putting some siege chaff on your border and want to surprise an enemy that you're about to elf, for example, they won't expect it if they're hiding behind a couple of these guys with Obfuscate. So things like that can be fun to play around with, but it's kind of gimmicky. I don't think it'll come up a whole lot. Pretenders. All right, and the Emir is sort of meh. You're not, in my experience, you're probably not going to have a super powerful bless in general. So the fact that they can bless themselves is not going to be really relevant. They have slightly better combat stats than the Sahir, but unfortunately, they do not have a guaranteed heir 2. So their best use for doing something like cloud trapezing is not really going to come up every time, and it's not worth recruiting these guys en masse with the hopes that you get those heir 2 randoms. So in general, I would probably use these for expansion, rapid expansion, because they are flyers, and then probably not really see them ever again, unfortunately. They have sort of that one-time niche use that's just for me personally. The problem is they have the same amount of leadership as a Tuba, with Taskmaster 2, yeah. So you can just be leading whatever these guys would be leading with a Tuba and have the same effect. So that's sort of my take on these guys. Let's go into the units that can then be recruited from your capital once your pretender wakes up. You will want to switch to these guys whenever you can, as opposed to your Jinn Warriors, because they have better stats and they have a magic weapon. So late game, it's good to have a couple of these guys around, but I think that their power level still winds up falling off toward the end, unless you're getting things like Will of the Fates, Armies of Gold, and stuff like that. Then they'll still be really strong, especially having magic weapons, but they only have one attack. They're kind of meh protection. Their stats are great. They're going to have high defense skill and magic power, but if you try and attack with these guys into drain scales, you're just gonna cry. That's how it is. Instead of having +3, you're having -3 to everything, and then they're just sort of mediocre units. I mean, strength 10, attack skill 10, that's like militia stats right there. Very disappointing. And then they're just hard countered by people with salt and magic weapons and spirit sight. So, which honestly, if people know Ubar is going to be in the game, you should probably expect that everybody has those blesses. So there you go. But these guys are worth having a couple of, I think. And maybe for your first war, get out a big fat old stack of these guys and rush somebody before magic comes online, and then keep them around to defend against anybody who tries to attack you early game. Hori are interesting. I did wound up not using Hori a whole lot, but there is something to be said for using Hori versus Shaitans in certain circumstances. Consider that the difference between the seduction value that they have and the corruption value that Shaitans have is for Hori seduction versus DRN of 9 for against morale, and then for Shaitans it's against DRN of I believe 13 or 14, also against morale. So in certain circumstances, against morale leaders of, for example, 10 or even lower, which is most human mages, you're going to actually have a decent chance of seducing them with Hori. And Hori are cheaper and can be masked. Much easier than Shaitans can. Now, Shaitans have just the flexibility of being able to do literally everything, but if you are going up against a human nation, for example, in a first war, having twice as many Hori, or I shouldn't even say that, having like, yeah, well, pretty much twice as many Hori uh, or more as Shaitans just descend on a human nation and decimate their mage line before magic comes online. You give them, for example, like handful of acorns or just a basic weapon or a ranged weapon. These guys are all right, and will do the job pretty much just as easily as a Shaitan would do. So in that case, having more is better. And I would have a couple of these around situationally. But otherwise, like I said, Shaitan do literally everything. So, fun fact, they do not have a body slot. That is just, how they roll. Gotta shake what you got, I guess. Next up, we're gonna go quickly over the Ifrit Warrior. I find a very little use for the Ifrit Warrior. Like I said, you're not going to have a very big bless, and it's very difficult to mask these guys. You only get one per turn after your pretender wakes up, and you have no summonable sacred units. So there's literally no reason to take a very powerful bless on Ubar. And they're just as easily countered as all of the rest of your units. Salt and magic weapon. A moonblade assault against these guys on somebody with spirit sight will make them cry. Even if they're in fire and even if they're in heat 3, magic 3. Their stats are great, but they have like 14 protection. This isn't buffed by magic power or fire power. And so they do kind of cry, and you can only lead them with either sultans or, for example, a mobile Titan pretender size 4 or larger pretender chassis that you pick. So yeah, I've made a couple of these guys in my games, and they usually wind up getting surrounded and killed pretty quickly, even to just like basic units. Their whole idea of being able to destroy whole armies by themselves, not really selling it to me. Probably recruit these guys never. Real quick, Ifrit Sultans suffer from sort of the same problem. As far as looking at these guys and seeing these stats, you say, wow, that is an incredible super combatant chassis that can just destroy armies by itself. Yes, it can, as long as that army doesn't have magic weapons, moonblades, salt, cold damage. There's so many counters to these. Not in cold 3 or drain 3. There's so many counters to these guys that it's just sad. Like, these guys are not the Nifl Jarls of this nation. Nifl Jarls in cold 3 will not die to anything. Their protection is insane. Their stats are insane. These guys, yes, their stats are great in their own dominion, but Neefle Jarls cannot be countered by something like Moonblades, cannot be countered by something like Salt. These guys are the Dai Oni of this nation. And when you think Yomi, you think, oh, all I need to do is slap a couple of, what are they called? Holy Scourges on some thugs, and Dai Oni delenda est. So that's pretty much the same. When somebody sees one of these guys on the field, they're like, oh, time to whip out my counters. No big deal. I would use these guys more in the role of high magic path combat casters, battlefield wide spells. With these guys, you can very easily do something like Rain of Stones, Wrathful Skies and Storm, whatchamacallit, the Heat from Hell and Firestorm if people are not prepared for that. So that's what I would use these guys for. And consider that every single one of these guys means that you're out 3 Shaitans. And Shaitans can get you more mages. These guys cannot do that. So super combatant or heavy thug uses are rather limited, in my opinion. Now for Shaitans. Shaitans do everything for this nation. Do literally everything. You want to be a cloud trapezing thrug? They can do that. You want to steal enemy mages? They can do that. You want to spy and infiltrate enemy capitals and get all their score graphs? They can do that. You want to make storm demons? They can do that. You want to break into blood and get ghoulas? They can do that. These guys do literally everything. There is not a single bad random on these guys that you will not wind up using. Air 3, Storm, Fire 3, Incinerate, Earth, self-buffing and thugging, Blood, Storm Demons, and Communions and stuff like that. Everything. These guys are the best. Make them forever. That's my personal opinion. Now, people can go different ways with Ubar, but I haven't really had an argument for not getting these guys, even if you have a different strategy. I would argue that there is plenty of cause, and I wouldn't even complain if these guys were nerfed slightly. Now, I'm not going to put forward any ideas for a nerf. I don't really like doing that whole my way or the highway kind of thing. But yeah, I think these guys are a little bit broken right now. They're very, very strong for this nation. So that's overview of their units. Real quick, we're going to go over what else they can get. As far as heroes go, you get 3 different options. You get these guys in various different forms. They have a random, I believe they have the same paths as a Jinn Emir. Yeah, fire, air, and then a random with this. So they're all right. They've got glamour. They'll be able to sneak around and do stuff. Interestingly enough, they've got a feat slot, so you can put stuff like Earth Boots on them and get actually Earth 2 with them. That's pretty significant if you get an Earth random with these guys, because none of your other Earth mages can, well, except for, I guess, the Tubas can wear boots as well. But something to keep in mind. You'll be getting these for your first year if you get any heroes at all, because the other 2 heroes have a recruitment limit and will only come after a certain turn limit. First to come would be the Mother Gula. Mother Gula is your way into blood and death. Death 2, these are her base stats, by the way. I didn't empower anything like that. Death 2 will get you skull staffs, and on repeat recruitment, you can give a skull staff to every other Gula that you have, and then all of a sudden they're Horde of Skeleton Assassins. Blood 3 allows you to make Blood Thorns. I've got the debug mod on, so and that gets you into Blood 4. Getting to Blood 5 is slightly more difficult. but in theory is doable. But as long as you can get blood thorns with these guys, if you didn't take blood on your pretender, you can give blood thorns then to your Shaitan blood randoms, and all of a sudden they're able to do storm demons pretty early in the game. So I think Blood Mother Gula is one of the best heroes that you can get, and every time you get one of these guys instead of the Mother Gula, you cry a little inside. I would never use her as an assassin. I would never send her away from your forts. I would be either blood hunting or forging or summoning with her for the end of the game, unless you're like throne rushing or something like that. And lastly, you get the Black King, the sickest of all sick heroes that you can ever get in the game of Dominions. Once we drop this off of him, these are his base magic paths. This is a 14 magic path unit right here. Name me other units in the game, commanders in the game, that you can just casually get that are 14 magic path commanders. This is insanity. They are amphibious, so they can go underwater. None of your other units can do that, except for the Marids, which you can summon, which I will probably wind up summoning one right now, just so we can showcase him. He can also summon more Marids, by the way. Fun fact. He can make all elemental royalty by himself. And yes, he can also make the Earth King. All you need to do is give him this to make a Bloodstone. Give him the Bloodstone. That gets him to Earth 3. Then you can summon a Troll King. Give the Bloodstone to the Troll King. The Troll King also give him Earth Boots, and you've got Earth 5. There you go. Easy peasy. This guy can make every single elemental royalty in the game. Well, except for obviously the Death one. Yeah, Death Fire Crosspath is a little hard on this nation though, so you can't get King of Banefires. But you could even get well, in theory you could even get not the Illwinter, the Illerth, Father Illerth. It'd be a little harder though if you don't have higher blood paths. He can also make you whatchamacallit, the Robes of Magi. If you give him air boosters and enough blood boosters, give him an air helmet and then the blood armor and the brazen skull, then he'll be blood 5 and air 5. There you go. You can even give him a hammer then and have cheaper robes of Magi. So this guy is great. This guy is just like wonderful. Again, I would, as much as possible, use him for magic and summoning and forging, and stick him maybe in a province where you're blood hunting so you can get that unrest down. I would not use him for super combatant purposes just because of how valuable he is to magic diversity in your empire. Now as for summons, we've got a couple of summoned units. Let me go into research here. Hins, Silots, Bins, Marids. We'll get that Marid real quick. And then Pride of Lions, pretend it doesn't exist because it's not super great. There's the Marid. It's basically a Black King without the blood paths. Still very awesome mage. Still amphibious. These guys, yeah, if you can make them, send them underwater and super combatant thug some water nation to make them cry. As far as your units go, this is a Hin. They're pretty good. You can get, let's see, as long as you've got wastes, they're pretty good to bolster your frontline troops. Hin, and they're cheap. You get for 6 air gems, you get 5 of them plus one for every 2 levels a caster is, and you can actually get pretty high in air with this nation, the air fire crosspath. So you can pump these guys out pretty cheap, and even if you don't go high up in air, any like human Sahir can just make these, just without, regardless of what random they have, they can just make them in any wasteland. So that's pretty cool. Stat wise, they've got a heat aura. Keep that in mind. Do not use these guys to guard commanders, your human mages. Pretend that I didn't do that and we'll just carry on with our lives. They have high fire and high shock resistance. They are ethereal and invisible. So that's pretty great. They only have one attack though, so again, limited usefulness, but if you're just making a bunch of these guys, they have high combat speed, you can attack rear, not the end of the world. I'd say worth the air gems if you have a massive air income and you're not using your air gems for other things, which you probably will be. I mean, there's a lot of uses for air gems with this nation. This is a bin. It's gonna be harder to get these guys out, but they are unseen and ethereal as well. They don't have fire resistance, but they have shock and poison resistance and 2 attacks. That's pretty unique for this nation, getting 2 attacks. Otherwise, their stats are meh. They don't have any magic powers or anything like that, so that's going to stay that way. They use water gems, which is okay if you're going to have a water income, but getting this water air cross path is going to be kind of hard with your nation until you get the Black King and some Marids. You're probably not going to see a lot of these guys. Now, as far as Silots go, I would highly recommend not forgetting that these guys exist. One of the things you're going to notice is that being an assassination nation that you are, rather than a super combatant nation with all of your summonable assassins, seducers, recruitable seducers, and corruptors, you're going to have a lot of them. That's going to be one of your strongest offenses and defenses. But you're going to be capped only limited on how many you can recruit. So don't forget these guys exist because they are still pretty powerful. Their seduction is again versus DRN of 9. They are flyers and can scale walls, and they have magic power, and they have a body slot this time because they put a gown over their boobs. But they have magic paths, and so these guys can do thunder strikes. They can summon air elementals in assassination battles. You can give them gear, and they can firepower up to fire 2 and do a bunch of stuff. They can self-buff themselves with air and be pretty good thugs and cloud trapeze everywhere. So these are worth having. And they're pretty easy to get too. Air 2, I think you need them in a wasteland again. Yeah, Air 2, 21 air gems. That's kind of expensive, but if you're trying to just spam out assassins and seducers, don't forget these guys exist. They are pretty decent. And lastly, we're going to go into blood real quick. You've got a spell that can again be cast in wastelands and summons more ghouls. If you are in the late game and you've ramped your blood economy super high, it's worth spending the blood slaves to get out armies of these guys, in my opinion, because that will get you an instant army real quick with all of the benefits, but also the downsides, because the summoned ghouls unfortunately cost upkeep. So keep that in mind. That's kind of a bummer. As for ghoulas, these guys are pretty great. We've got a couple right here for you. One of the important things to remember about these guys is that 50% regeneration. If you're going to be using them in assassinations, that's probably not going to come up a whole lot because mage assassinations, you don't want generally to be fighting in melee combat. You want to be casting spells, and like I said, give them a skull staff and they can be Horde of Skeletons assassins. That's pretty great. They're not going to be as good at following your armies around and assassinating into enemy forts because they don't have scale walls. So these guys would probably be more of your defensive line of seduction assassination. If somebody gets onto your fort, you just have like 10 of these guys who had been blood searching and are now going to be assassins instead. But another thing is you can actually use these guys in battles as turbo communions. I mean, think about it. 50% regeneration, 2 forms, blood mages. You get them into Sabbaths, you get them into Sabbath slaves, and you get a couple of these guys. Heck, you can even give some of them ghouls on guard commander. Give your Sabbath slaves a couple of guard commander ghouls. Then your Sabbath master will cast Soul Vortex. This is a turbo communion that'll last pretty much through anything. You can stick a Coral Blade on them, give them some extra hit points. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So don't forget that these guys can do a lot of things as well. And you'll want to have probably as many of them as you can in the late game. Arguably, they are better for you in many cases than vampires, but toward the late game, the higher path access from vampires in Death 3 and Blood 3 is just a little bit better to have a couple of them around. So, but you can stay at Blood 5 for a long time. You've got Storm Demons there. You've got I think Bind Devil and Demon Knight are there as well. You can also make Demon Knights a little harder because the Earth 2 path, you're going to need a Bloodstone on your Shaitans, for example. But you can do it. And then the Gulas are there in Blood 5. So you can sit in Blood 5 for a long time while you research things like evocation, alteration, construction, conjuration, whatever. And then once it gets to late game, probably transition to vampires, some higher level blood. You'll want eventually life for life, leech, and stuff like that. So, yeah. But these guys are great. All right. I think I've pretty much covered everyone here. Let's go ahead and duck out of here. Oh, wait, actually, there was one more thing I wanted to show off in here. Their national item. You get a national item, which you can make, which is called a companion bracelet, and it gives you, well, I'll show you what it gives you. Let's stick a bunch of these guys. By the way, if this test goes well, haven't really tested the test, but if this test goes well, you'll be able to see that sticking 2 of these on any commander will get you 2 of the companions. Yep. So you can have multiple wives. You know, not particularly surprising for this particular nation. Another thing is that this nation has a national ability to have guardian spirits, and the guardian spirits that you get for this nation are different from the guardian spirits you would get if you were playing Calum. The guardian spirits are just more of these. So basically what this bracelet gets you is a free guardian spirit. Guardian spirits show up with a percentage chance based on your priest level. Unfortunately, you only have level 1 priests, and all of your Jinn commanders, including your sultans and your Jinn emirs and any Jinns that you make prophets, will have minus 100% chance to get guardian spirits. So it's just humans that have the guardian spirit tag. And I guess like mound fiends too, if you get a bunch of mound fiends, or if I were to throw, say, for example, one of those debug senseis at Holy 9 into a battle, he'd probably have a good chance of getting a guardian spirit. But anyways, this can be kind of fun to just drop down on somebody. Again, if you have air gems to spare, see where I'm going with this. You just have a bunch of air gems, and these guys show up. They're pretty great. They've got air and astral, and if you are playing around with the improved spellcasting AI mod, you might notice things like them going into communions by themselves. And the more of these guys you have, well, the bigger your communion's going to get. Now, if you notice, I only sent like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mages into this fight, but we've got like a massive mage core now, including Astral in this communion here. And they're going to lay their hurt down on some indies, but you know, what are you going to do? Then they can summon their own armies and stuff like that of phantasmal warriors. Yeah, so this is fun to play around with. Don't forget that that item exists. It also does give you a couple other things like luck and research bonuses. Um, it is cursed, so is it worth sticking two of these on one guy? I don't know. Probably not, unless you're doing it for the memes, but you know, what are we without our memes? All right, let's go ahead and get into pretender design. Ubar. For pretender design, you've got a lot of options, but because, as you can see, you can only go dormant or imprisoned, and again, there's very high cause for going straight dormant rather than imprisoned, you don't actually have as many options as you think. For example, you're never going to take an awake expander monster because you're not going to be awake. By the time you get to the end of year one, in theory, your expansion is over and you're already in your first war. Will having a awake expander monster be better than, say, having a Titan chassis? Maybe, probably not necessarily, especially since you'll have been able to forge items for the Titan chassis that you know is coming out. And there are some actually pretty good Titan chassis that you can take. You can take a Bronze Colossus, for example, and he's already going to be dormant. Now, he's going to be super expensive, but I mean, Bronze Colossus is Bronze Colossus, so not many people have an answer to Bronze Colossus at the beginning of year one, just like they never do for any other nation. You can also take the Anunnaki of Growth and Rebirth, who has built-in Vine Shield. That's pretty fun to play around with. You don't have to give him a Vine Shield, you just give him two weapons, or a weapon in like a Shield of Gleaming Gold for Awe or whatever, and then he still has Vine Shield. So he can be pretty fun to play around with, plus he's got just free immortality. What else? You can get another one of these guys, but he suffers from all the same weaknesses that I've demonstrated. Not sure if getting one of these guys is necessarily worth it. What else? Well, as far as Titan chassis go, I guess, your standard chassis. Aside from Titans, you can do immobiles. One of my favorite memes to go with is this guy, and the reason is because he is the cheapest way that you can get max scales, and then you're done. There you go. Dormant, max scales, there you go. Actually, you would not necessarily want to go Growth 3, maybe Luck 3 or Luck 2, Growth 1. The reason is because in your capital, when your capital wakes up, when your pretender wakes up, you're going to have increased growth in your capital. So it's kind of pointless to take Growth 3 unless you, unless you want that extra growth for just one full year while your pretender's asleep, which probably not necessarily worth it. So keep that in mind when you're making your pretender. You actually don't necessarily need to take growth. In fact, funnily enough, because your cap will increase growth, you could probably even take death scales and still have growth in your capital. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but it's theoretically possible that you could do something like that. Anyways, this guy is the cheapest. If you don't want magic and you are just like, give me scales, you can do something like that. I did do something like that with my first game. It worked out pretty well for me. I survived to the end of the game. I didn't necessarily win, but I don't think that was due to, per se, my pretender design, just my choices in the game. Other things you could do, Golden Idol. Well, it's Golden Idol, but Golden Idol people usually take, because of how cheap it is, to take large bless. You don't really need that. Fountain of Blood can be fun. You can go up to Blood 5, which is kind of important for getting early blood boosters, and then like Earth, Astral. But your scales won't be as good. Let's say, dang, that's unfortunate. something like that. I mean, this is still pretty good scales, I guess. You can sort of see the theme I'm going with, though, is you want scales for this nation. Again, you don't really have a good bless. Um, you can take a bless that is geared toward defending yourself against your weaknesses. For example, poison. All elves suffer from being susceptible to dying from poison. You're not really going to have a lot of regen on your units. You're not going to have a lot of nature mages unless you corrupt them. But on that vein, you don't really need to worry that much about magic diversity. Like, let's say you take a Great Sage and you just go like full rainbow, and like whatever magic pass there we go, some random thing, obviously not Dominion 1, that would be dumb. There we go. I don't know, this is, just take as many magic paths as you can. You don't really need this because you have corruptors, you have seducers, you can steal indie mages and get free magic diversity from that. Heck, in my game, I corrupted Bloodhenge Druids. I corrupted an Air 4 indie illusionist. I corrupted a Dryad that was defending a throne province. Consider throne provinces and indie provinces with mages that initially look hard to take as free mage supply for you, as long as they're not like, ridiculously strong Titan chassis like Anunnakis of Air or the Great Mother or whatever, because those are kind of hard to steal. But yeah, you really don't necessarily need to worry too much about magic diversity for Ubar. You're just going to steal it from either indies or your neighbors. So I would just sort of go hard on the scales. In that vein, Great Sages are pretty cool because they have Inspiring Researcher. Even better than that, you can do Kneader of the Moon, who has Inspiring Researcher +2, although those new magic paths are kind of meh. Even better than that is Kneaderette of Many Names, because she's also Inspiring Researcher 2, and new magic paths cost is 20. Plus, she has magic power, so that's gonna scale well with your nation. Say Blood 5. Yeah, she's kind of a bit more expensive, as you can see, so drop those scales down a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry. Let's say Crystal Paths. There we go. And then nature. And then you can get a scale of luck or whatever. More dominion. So yeah, you can play around with stuff like that. Basically, my priorities as far as a Pretender's design would be focus on scales first. Make sure you always, always, always have Magic 3. If you have anything less than Magic 3, you're doing something wrong, in my opinion. And then just sort of decide what meme you want to go with. Do you want to go with Titan Chassis to protect yourself against an early rush? Do you want to go with an Immobile and get the best scales ever? Do you want to go with somebody with Inspiring Researcher and go ridiculously hard into high research? I mean, consider this. Inspiring Researcher 2 plus Magic Scales 3 on a tuba with Owl Quills and Lightless Lanterns, yeah, nobody's going to catch you in research. Nobody. So, yeah, that would be my suggestions. The reason... okay, one last thought. Do you go imprisoned Ubar? I would say no, and not just because of the units that you have available to you for the first 3 years. You can live off of this. This is a not terrible nation as far as just going around goes. It will struggle a little bit. These guys like really bring the meat and bones to the party, but the biggest thing that you're missing out on is 100 gold per turn, 2 extra gems, increased growth for free, and level 3, 3 commander point fort in your capital. All of those things are just lost for 3 years if you take imprisoned pretender. What I would say is if you're going imprisoned Ubar, you've got some serious balls of steel on you, or you're playing in something like a Disciples game with somebody else to sort of protect your nation while you get strong, or you're playing in an all ages, all nations, ridiculously big game where you can just sort of hide in the corner of the map and then just outscales everyone, and then 3 years later your Ubar pretender shows up and wrecks everyone's face. Other than that, probably not a good idea to take imprisoned. Let's go over real quick the expansion. Nope, called it Ubar Eats, just because I'm funny like that. And I compared Ubar's expansion to some random Helheim that I put together. And we'll see how they match up. So as far as Helheim goes, I just put a stupid bless on these guys. Magic weapons, they already have Spirit Sight on their units, so this is an anti-Ubar bless. Poison resistance, shock resistance, fire resistance, cold resistance, defense, undying, blood surge, and larger. And I did pretty well. I only had like maybe 1 or 2 failed expands. I've lost very few Hellheardings overall. Let's see. I did forget to expand 1 turn with these guys, unfortunately, in this direction, so I'm probably behind a little bit. But in total, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Yeah, 21 provinces. You know, your usual expansion with Helheim. What are you going to do? And these guys are doing pretty well for themselves. Let's go ahead and go through the battles. 3 this turn. No losses, no losses, no losses. Yeah, so pretty good. I'm going to bring all these guys back. Oh, and we also have put up a temple, and we're building a lab and a palisade in this province, and we're also building another palisade in this province with our prophet. Our dominion has expanded pretty far, and we already know where Ubar is up in this corner, so we can go to war with them if we really wanted to. I've got 6 PD in all of my provinces, and I still have pretty decent income. We're only getting 4 per turn. I didn't really build the scales out right for this, so my recruitment points aren't letting me go full out. I have to switch to Valkyries, although even now that's not working out for me for some reason. Yeah, I didn't take growth, or I took literally no scales, just like dumped heat. But yeah, it was a stupid, just whatever, bless. So you can do better, obviously. But we're going to stop recruitment here. We're going to pull everyone back, and we're going to see how many Hellherdings in total we have. And then we're going to compare that with how many Jinn Warriors we have. Where are my Hellherdings? I think that's probably it. Like I said, I had a couple of failed expansions. Actually, we can probably see it from here. And we'll give these guys to this guy. So as of turn 12, the end of expansion, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. So 35 Hellherdings. Minus whatever we lost in expansion. We also have some Valkyries, so that means that we could have probably had more Hellherdings if I'd taken better scales. But 35 Hellherdings, that's pretty decent for a force that you can throw into a first war against some other random neighbor of yours. Not to mention the fact that you have 20 provinces. Oops. Now, as far as Ubar goes, we'll compare it up. Now, for Ubar, again, we had about 2 or 3 failed expansions. Just accidents happen, commanders get sniped, whatever. Your elves get overwhelmed by a group of indies that was larger than you expected. Mistakes happen. But we have still done pretty well for ourselves, probably either on par with or better than Helheim. Looks like better. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. Yep, 27 provinces. Now, I, in my capital, have been recruiting nothing but Jin Warriors, and once I had enough gold and resources, and you see we have enough gold to put down another fort after recruitment um, of a Jin Sahir and Jin Warriors. Our commander, our pretender hasn't even woken up yet, but we are getting, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 Jin Warriors per turn. Per turn. And as far as expansion goes, these guys can take anything. I got one of my heroes here because the scales. Heavy calves, no problem. More heavy calves, no problem. Indies, whatever. War elephants, no problem. 0 losses. Yeah, so these guys will just chew through everything. As you can see, we've got 6 PD or more in every single one of our provinces. We have a fort already done. There goes the temple for it. And, well, I guess if we just drop one of these guys, we can go ahead and upgrade this to a fortress. Or we could have just put down another palisade, like, say, here. Honestly, though, the province income is not super great for these guys. Income, well, I guess this is a good place to put a fort, all the way out there. This would be okay, too. This is where I've put one of my forts. This is my capital. Yeah, so we kind of got meh locations, but our scales haven't really spread out. Or maybe they have. Yeah, some of them they have. But anyways, the pretender that I took, let's see if he wakes up this turn. There he is. It's just stupid scales build. Basically, the one I showed you with the divine glyph. 3 order, 3 production, 3 heat, growth 1, and it's gone up to growth 2 because we're getting more growth, luck 2, and magic skills. So that allows me to get 10 Jin per turn. Now, if we ignore those 10 Jin that we got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, from recruitment last turn, and we consolidate all the rest of the Jin that we have into our capital. Where are they all? There's some. And there's some. Yeah, I've gotten pretty far out there now. Obviously, you'd have bumped other players by this point if you were going that far out. Let's see if I can go pick these guys up instead of having them walk all the way across. I think that's everybody. Yeah. So we'll just do a couple turns. Meh. That was silly of me. And pick them up and go there. No, go there. Well, honestly, these guys, the Jin warriors kind of move a little slowly because of their armor penalty, even though they are flying. So don't expect them to move very far. Am I still on repeat recruitment? I am. Oh well. If we hit Y, we see everybody that we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. You know what? I can do this faster. There we go. 52 plus 9. 60 units. 60 Jin on, what was it, turn 12? Yeah. So 60 versus 30. That's what you're going to have to deal with to defend in a first war against somebody attacking you. And in your scales after expansion, these guys are pretty great. So with mage support, you can probably defend against a rush with just these guys, recruiting nothing else, recruiting none of these camel riders, recruiting none of these slaves. Maybe in your second fort you can do that. Maybe in your other provinces you can get a couple of these guys. But honestly, in your cap, just get Jin warriors. They'll expand for you. They'll be able to defend you in a first war. So yeah, that's sort of my strategy behind Ubar. And again, like I said, their power does fall off a little bit once magic starts coming online, once counters to them start coming out in terms of magic items and thugs and let's say water magic for like falling frost would be bad, poison would be bad. So keep those in mind when you're going up against somebody because those can make you hurt. But if you got somebody with poison, then switch to ghouls. They've got poison resistance. If you've got people spamming mass evocations, go with slaves. You can get a lot of those. So maybe stop recruiting these guys because of the high upkeep that they have. That's going to cost you. You're already at minus 400, minus 500 gold per turn by now. That can get kind of expensive. So what I would do is switch from using these as a main battle army and breaking them off into smaller groups and doing stealthy raiding into enemy territories with those, and then using main battle armies of either slaves or camel riders with flaming arrows or ghouls with point buffs and stuff like that. So there you go. Now, what kind of things can you expect from Ubar late game? Well, I'm going to show you a little bit the end of the one game that I've played in. And it's on the same map. We had a lot of fun playing on this map, although ultimately I did not win. Oh, this isn't going to work, is it? Oops. Because I don't have, yeah, I don't have the, my bad. What else do we have? No. Okay, well, suffice it to say that you can get a lot of guys corrupted with Shaitans and stuff like that. At the end of the game, I wound up having something like I was fighting against Mikone and I was fighting against Arco. I wound up having about, at the end of the game, 8 mystics that I had corrupted. Like I said, I had Bloodhenge Druids from Indies. I had an Air 4 Illusionist. I had almost 20 of Mekone's Gigante mages, his Ephors, his Gerontes. I even had some Archons that I had corrupted. I hadn't wound up seeing any Cyclopses, but Cyclopses' morale is not particularly high, so corruption would probably have stolen a couple of those. And the one key thing to consider with corruption as well is that corruption steals not only the commander, but everything that the commander was holding, including items and gems. So that's an even more reason to steal indie commanders because more often than not, they will have gems, especially in throne provinces. And if somebody is attacking you, or if you're going to fight a major battle with somebody and you steal one of their big battlefield-wide spellcasters that they had dumped a bunch of gems on, those gems are all now yours. So corruption and seduction are very powerful mechanics. You are better at Pan at corrupting and seducing because you can do it from anywhere and they will go back to your capital because of flying. You can do it into forts that you are sieging, which is kind of broken. So all of these mechanics make Ubar a very powerful assassination nation and not a super combatant nation, at least not in my eyes. So thank you for watching. I hope that was informative. and see you later.